One of the amazing things about humanity is how often and how effortlessly we ignore miracles. The strangest, craziest, most sublime things happen around us all the time without anyone taking much notice. One such miracle used to take place at Cliffside Park in New Jersey. For a few glorious moments every summer morning, as the sun began rising out of the Atlantic, great slabs of light between the skyscraper canyons of Manhattan mixing with the mist coming off the Hudson. It was a scene made famous on postcards and television commercials, but the men who gathered in the park every morning before dawn almost never gave the sight so much as a quick glance. They were mostly older gentlemen who had come to play chess on the long rows of stone tables near Cliffside Drive. For every man playing a game, there were 3 others standing about watching. In hushed, murmuring voices, they exchanged gossip and news, announced the births of grandchildren and the deaths of long-time friends. Except for their sneakers and sweatshirts, they could have been the ancient Greeks conferring in the agora. The largest group of these men were gathered loosely around 2 expert chess players, David and Julius. They seemed to be unlikely opponents. David was tall, gaunt, and intense, with a mop of curly black hair. Although he was in his late 30s, he played with the concentration of a child building a house of cards. His fingers smooshed his face into strange expressions, and his long limbs coiled around one another at odd, uncomfortable-looking angles. Completely focused on the game, he was totally aware of looking like a human pretzel. He knew he needed to concentrate if he hoped to beat a wily opponent like Julius. Julius, on the other hand, had only one way of sitting. At 68 years old, he often said his ass was way too fat to squiggle around like David's. Once he had plopped himself down, that's how he stayed. His legs, stuck straight out, were barely long enough to rest his heels on the ground. His meticulously ironed slacks were jacked halfway up his calves, exposing the white socks he didn't think anyone could see. Under his windbreaker, he wore one of 24 white shirts he got from his brother-in-law when he retired from the garment business 5 years ago. Hey, why not? They fit perfect. To complete his look, the old guy was working a half-smoked cigar around the side of his mouth. These opponents had faced one another many times, usually drawing a sizable crowd. This morning's match had begun with a flurry of standard moves until the older man, a speed player, began a blitzkrieg with his bishops. Since then, David had had to think about every move very carefully. Julius, always a showman, went to work on David psychologically, loud enough for everyone to hear. How long are you gonna take? My Social Security will expire and you'll still be sitting here. David pulled his fingers slowly across his face. Without looking up, he said, I'm thinking. So think already. David lifted his queen's knight and moved it tentatively forward. The moment his fingers lifted off the piece, Julius responded like lightning, pushing a pawn forward to challenge. David glanced up for a moment, genuinely puzzled, before looking down to study his options. Again, he's thinking, Julius announced, reaching into a carefully folded paper bag to retrieve a styrofoam cup full of coffee. David shot him a disappointed look. Hey, where's the travel mug I bought you? In the sink, dirty from yesterday. Do you have any idea how long those things take to decompose? David reached across the table to take the cup, but Julius drew back, protecting his caffeinated treasure. Listen, Mr. Ecosystem, if you don't move soon, I'll start to decompose. Play the game. Disgruntled, David countered the challenging pawn with one of his own. Then Julius really gave him something to think about. Without hesitation, he slid his queen into the middle of the battle. So, the old man leaned in over the board. If I am not mistaken, a certain someone left a message on your answering machine yesterday. Julius sat back and took a sip of his coffee. David merely grunted. Furthermore, I understand that this person is single after an unfortunate divorce, that she has no children, that she has an interesting career, that she's educated and attractive, all good things. "You're doing it again," his opponent complained with a growl. At some point, Julius would invariably bring up something uncomfortable, some emotionally charged issue that made it difficult to continue with the match. David was pretty sure there was no malicious intent, that the old guy was just worried about him, wanted to see him happy. Then again, maybe he was just trying to win at chess. He protected his bishop by advancing his king's knight. "So did you call her back, I'm wondering?" Julius said, casually moving another pawn. "Look, I'm sure she's a beautiful and sophisticated woman, but she invited me to go country line dancing. I can't really see myself doing that. And besides, I'm convinced those tight cowboy jeans can do permanent damage to one's reproductive organs." "What? So you can't even call the poor girl back and spend 5 minutes on the phone? After she worked up the chutzpah to call you? You can't just maybe be polite and call her back?" "Dad, I'm not interested," David said flatly. "Besides, I'm still a married man." He held up the wedding ring on his finger to prove his point. He pulled one of his bishops back to safety. Suddenly, Julius felt embarrassed by the presence of the crowd, the old-timers who were his friends and confidants. They knew the whole sad story of David's broken marriage and his refusal, or inability, to let it go. He glanced around them, hoping they'd take a hint and make themselves scarce. Not a chance. They were more interested in the conversation than in the game. As he usually did, Julius went ahead and said what was on his mind anyhow. "Son, I'm thankful you spend so much time with me. Family is important. But I'm only saying, it's been what, 4 years? And you still haven't signed the divorce papers?" 3 years. 3, 4, 10, what difference? The point is, it's time to move on with your life. I'm serious. This is not healthy, what you're doing. As if to prove his point, Julius reached across the table and captured a knight with his queen. "Healthy? Look who's talking about healthy." He pointed at the old man's cigar and coffee. "We're exposed to so many carcinogens in our environment, and you make it worse by—" The frantic chirping of David's pager interrupted him. He glanced down at the number display and saw that it was only Marty calling from the office for the 3rd time that morning. "That's about 6 times they've called you. Are you trying to get yourself fired? Or maybe you've decided to get a real job?" David moved his bishop to take one of the pawns guarding Julius's king. "Checkmate," he announced matter-of-factly. "See you tomorrow, Dad." He untangled his limbs, hopped up, and planted a kiss on his father's cheek, then grabbed his 15-speed racing bike. "That's not checkmate," Julius roared. "I can still take your... But then you can... Oh." He yelled across the park as David began to paddle away. "You could let an old man win once in a while. It wouldn't kill you." But secretly, Julius Levinson loved the fact that his son could swoop in whenever he felt like it and beat almost anyone in the park. A rush-hour jam session was underway. Grumbling across the George Washington Bridge, blaring bumper-to-bumper traffic mingled its noise with the honking and screeching of 10,000 hungry seagulls to produce an early morning orchestral cacophony over the Hudson, the whole mess pouring itself into Manhattan. David, on his bike, shot through the gridlock and hung a hard right onto Riverside Drive. 5 minutes later, he turned onto a street full of old warehouses and coasted to a stop in front of an aging, 6-story brick building. Foot-high stainless steel letters anchored into the bricks spelled out the name of the site's present occupant, Compact Cable Corporation. Outside the front doors, a man with a picket sign was marching back and forth, protesting. David dismounted and wheeled the bike over to the man. "Still planning to shut us down, huh?" "You got that right, brother," the man answered. King Solomon was a slight, hyper-alert black man in his 50s. As usual, he was dressed up in a crisp suit and a bow tie. His sign read, "Unchain the airways. Cable companies have no right to charge you." "Haven't seen you for a couple of months. Everything all right?" King looked both ways, then leaned closer conspiratorially. Been at the library doing research. I found a ton of good stuff for my show. King had a half-hour slot on the public access channel where he went head-to-head with the giant communications conglomerates like AT&T. In addition, he'd been picketing around town for years, explaining his ideocentric theories, a mix of socialism and anarchy, to anyone who would listen. "Hey, Levinson, you got a minute?" David pictured Marty stomping around the office in a ballistic frenzy over some minor technical glitch, pulling his hair out. "Sure, I got a minute." "Okay, the subject is phone calls, but it applies to the legalized extortion of the cable companies as well, 'cause both move through satellites. Because you guys control these satellites, you can charge little guys like me outrageous prices to do things like watch a football game, or make a phone call to my lady friend who lives in Amsterdam, right? Now, the same thing was going on in England way back in the 1840s. The government was trying to regulate communication so they could make extra money. If somebody wanted to send a letter, they had to go to the post office and hand it to a clerk. The farther the letter was going, the more this clerk charged you. Long-distance rates, see? The whole thing was so expensive and such a damn headache, nobody wrote letters. Then this one dude came along, I forget his name right now, who figured out all the work, all the labor, was done at the beginning and the end of the process, sorting out and then delivering the letters. All costs along the way, the shipment remained the same, whether there was one letter or 100. So this guy goes to the king and says, "This is bullshit, baby. Let's have one low price for all letters, wherever they're going." The king said okay, and do you know what happened? Everybody started writing letters. Exactamundo, mon ami. All over Europe, folks started expressing their feelings and communicating scientific ideas. And, shazam, we had the Industrial Revolution. That's why I'm out here every day. If y'all would quit monopolizing the satellites sent up there at taxpayers' expense, I could be on the phone to my lady friend in Amsterdam, and my show could be seen in China. The common people could have a renaissance, an information revolution. What do you think? Somewhere in the middle of King's speech, David's pager had buzzed again. This was absurd, even for the eternally panicked Marty. He began to think something serious might be happening. As usual, King, you're convincing. Have you ever played on the World Wide Web? The Internet? He hadn't. Didn't own a computer. David told him where to find a public terminal and suggested that he check it out. It was the closest thing he knew to unrestricted communication. Then it was time to go into work and face Marty. Inside the revolving doors was a completely different world. Compact Cable's front lobby was a graceful, marble and mahogany environment with a ceiling 3 stories tall. A swank, low-slung reception desk stood in the middle of the room guarding the entrance. With his bike hoisted onto one shoulder, David strolled past the receptionist and into the main office space, a beehive of proportionate work areas with a huge bank of television monitors mounted to the southern wall. The minute he walked in, he knew something big was up. The room was much louder than usual, the activity more frantic. Before he could put down his bike, he was confronted by a one-man electrical storm. Marty Gilbert, a heavy-set man with a lascivious goatee, blasted out of his office, waving his arms and shouting, "What the hell is the point of having a beeper if you never turn the damn thing on?" Steaming mad, Marty stopped in the middle of the room, waiting for an answer. He was armed with his 2 favorite weapons, a can of diet soda in one hand, a cordless phone in the other. "It was turned on," David explained matter-of-factly. "I was ignoring you." "You mean to tell me," Marty screamed, "you got every one of those pages and you didn't call in? Did it occur to you that maybe, just maybe, something critical was going on?" David was used to Marty's apoplectic, foot-stomping shit fits. He had one every couple of days, and they usually lasted about 10 minutes. The man lived in a perpetual state of high anxiety. He was constitutionally high-strung and had compounded his problem by taking on the incredibly stressful job of operations manager for one of the largest cable providers in the nation. His job was, in his words, to be in charge of every little thing. In a complex operation like compact cable, there were 1,000 little things that could go wrong, and enough of them did every day to keep Marty hopping from one crisis to another. This morning's run-in was a perfect example of why he hated David's guts and loved him like a brother at the same time. Marty knew beyond any shadow of a doubt that David was the best chief engineer in the country. He was so overqualified for the job, so good at handling all the hyper-technical stuff, that Marty knew he'd never be able to replace him in a million years. David was a secret weapon, the ace in the hole that kept him in front of the competition. Now that he had finally shown up, Marty knew it was only a matter of time before he could phone corporate headquarters with the good news that they were the first ones to restore service to their customers. But it drove him bonkers how flamboyantly casual David was about everything. If he didn't return phone calls or answer his pager, Marty could huff and puff all he wanted, but there wasn't much else he could do about it. The quirky, technical wizard made his own hours and operated independently of Marty's control. "So what's the big emergency?" "Nobody can figure it out." Marty calmed himself with a long gulp of soda. "Started this morning around 4 a.m. Every channel is making like it's 1950. Picture's all messed up. We're getting static and this weird vertical roll problem. We've been down in the feed room all morning trying everything." David stashed his bike next to the vending machines in the employee kitchen and was about to head off for the feed room when Marty, expressing his frustration, slammed his empty soda can into the trash. "Damn it, Marty. There's a reason we have bins labeled recycle," David said loudly, turning back. The company's recycling program had been instituted largely due to David's insistence. He was a one-man posse for the eco-police. More disturbing still, when he bent down to fish the can out, he found 6 more identical cans at the bottom of the bin. Appalled, he asked, "Who's been throwing their aluminum cans in the garbage?" "So sue me," Marty hissed back. Then before David could launch into one of his Save the Earth speeches, his boss took him by the arm and forcibly helped him down a short hallway and through a door marked Transmission Feed. Inside were the mechanical guts of compact cable. Hundreds of flat steel boxes, signal modulators, were stacked in steel racks along the back wall. A long console with mixing and switching panels stretched the length of the room below several television monitors. Taped to the walls were technical charts showing satellite positions, vertical and horizontal transponder polarizations, the different commercial licenses within the megahertz bandwidth, and an ancient poster of 4 hippies in San Francisco with the words, "Better living through chemicals," above their heads. And cable. Miles of coaxial cable, the backbone of the industry, snaked off the overhead shelves and ran everywhere underfoot. Like 1,000 black asps writhing around an Egyptian tomb, the flexible cord connected every piece of machinery to all the others. "Okay, you guys, make room," Marty squawked as they came in. "The amazing Dr. Levinson has agreed to grace us with a demonstration of his skills." Paying no attention, David walked over to the mixing board where a technician was fiddling with some knobs. The monitor above his head showed a transmission of the Today Show. Like Marty said, the picture was disintegrating into rolling vertical bars every few seconds. "Looks like somebody scrambling our satellite feed," David mumbled, thinking for a moment of King Solomon marching around outside. "Definitely," one of the 2 technicians told him. "We're pretty sure it's a satellite problem. Have you already tried switching transponder channels?" "Oh, please," Marty howled. He was up on tiptoes looking over their shoulders. "Of course we tried that. What do we look like, idiots?" "Don't answer that." David pulled a chair up to the control board and sat down. Almost immediately, his long limbs began to coil around one another. "Bring up the weather channel." The technician plinked a command into the keyboard. A text display popped up on the television monitor. Experiencing technical difficulties. Please stand by. May I? David asked, moving the technician out of the way. I want to try something real quick here. His fingers whizzed across the keyboard, switching the monitor over to broadcast reception, regular antenna on the roof reception. Suddenly, the Today Show looked fine, then fuzzy, then fine again. Oh my God, you're a genius, Marty gushed. How did you do that? Not so fast, Marty. With his legs woven into a lotus position, David hunched over the board, working in trance-like concentration. The Today Show was replaced by a computer bar graph. After entering the last few commands, David came up for air. You're right, it's definitely the satellite. That good picture was a local broadcast. I pointed our rooftop dish over toward Rockefeller Plaza. They're putting out good signal. And what's this computer caca on the screen? We're not sending this out to the customers, are we? Will you relax already? No, it's not going out. I'm running a signal diagnostic. David studied the test results on the screen, then sat back, perplexed. According to this, the satellite signal is fine. It's coming through at full power. Maybe the satellite itself is fritzing out. Turning to Marty, he came up with a plan of action. I'll get up to the roof and retrofit the dish to another satellite. You get on the phone and rent some channel space. Satcom 5 has plenty of space available. A self-satisfied grin spread across the heavy man's face. He didn't understand all the technical stuff, but for the time being, he had the jump on David. Already thought of that, he announced proudly. I called Satcom, I called Galaxy, and I called Telestar. Everybody in town is having the same problem. Everybody in town? David asked, incredulous. If those guys are having this same problem, it means the whole country, no, the whole hemisphere is getting bad pictures. David thought it over for a moment, then added, That's impossible. Exactly, Marty shot back. Now fix it. Miguel sat bolt upright out of a deep sleep and tried to focus his eyes. He had been dreaming a flying dream. A beautiful girl with pale skin and luminous dark eyes had taken him by the hand and showed him how to lift himself into the air. At first he was afraid of falling out of the sky, but once he got the hang of it, and the two of them began looping and diving like a pair of dolphins, his only fear was that the girl would disappear. He pulled back the plastic window shade. A squad of fearless soldiers, the 7- and 9-year-olds from next door, were shooting it out with squirt guns. They looked like the Ninja Turtles at the OK Corral. Once they were shot, they died in ostentatious flailing body slams against the back of Case's Winnebago. Vayanase! Quit hitting our damn trailer! He yelled. The warriors looked up at him, then squealed away as a group, fanning out across the Seagal Estates, which is what the owner had the nerve to call this place. An RV campground that had gone downhill. It was now sort of a flop house on gravel and asphalt. Half the tenants were Mexican migrant laborers, campesinos, who pooled their money to buy a mobile home so they could bring their families north. The other half were white folks who had retired out to the desert. It was half a mile from the highway, and cyclone fencing on 3 sides separated it from the surrounding alfalfa fields. Miguel, along with his sister, his half-brother, and his stepfather, had been renting space at the estates for about 3 months. They'd been living in the Winnebago for almost a year. 2 weeks before, Miguel had graduated from Taft-Morton Consolidated High School, but refused to go through the ceremony. He hardly knew any of the other kids and was afraid Russell, his stepfather, would show up and embarrass him. That evening, Alicia organized a cake and soda party for just the 4 of them. Halfway through it, Russell, who was drinking something stronger than soda, went off on a drunken, teary-eyed speech about how proud he was and how he wished Miguel's mama was still alive so she could see this. It ended the way so many of their conversations did, in an ugly shouting match with Miguel slamming the door on his way out. At the front of the trailer, 11-year-old Troy sat in the kitchen, slapping the side of the television set. They were about 40 miles north of Los Angeles, and the broadcast was being relayed through satellites to improve its signal strength. But it obviously wasn't doing much good. "What are you doing?" Miguel hollered from beneath his pillow. "The TV's all blurry and messed up. Hitting it isn't going to help. It's probably a problem at the station. Just leave it alone." But Troy didn't have much patience. When the picture failed to improve after 10 seconds, he smacked the set again. Miguel threw back the sheets and came to see what was going on. It was already 8 a.m., and he should have been gone out looking for a job by now. "See?" Troy gestured toward the rolling picture. "Should I whack it again?" "No, Mr. Kung Fu Television Repairman. I told you, it's not the set. It's the... whatevers. The airways." His younger brother was unconvinced, so Miguel changed the subject. "Have you taken your medicine?" "I'll take it later." Troy was born with adrenal complex problems, the same condition that killed their mother. He was supposed to take a small dose of hydrocortisone every morning, but because of the expense of the medicine, his family allowed him to skip a couple of days a week. As long as he ate right and wasn't under a lot of stress, missing the medicine wasn't any big deal. "Have you eaten anything yet?" "Nope." "Alicia, what are those dishes doing?" Obviously, they were sitting in the sink waiting for someone to wash them. She'd made herself breakfast, leaving the boys to fend for themselves. She was up front, stretched out in the Winnebago's passenger seat, clipping photos out of a fashion magazine. When she heard Miguel yelling at her, she raised the volume on her Walkman. She was 14, bored, and developing a gigantic attitude problem. Since her hormones had started to kick in that spring, she'd taken to wearing makeup, skinny cutoffs, and tight white T-shirts, which had become the unofficial uniform among the ninth graders at her new school. Miguel came over and was about to give her hell for being so selfish when a red Chevy truck skidded to a halt in the gravel at the end of their driveway. The driver sat inside for a moment, angrily talking into a cellular phone. His name was Lucas Foster, a local farmer who had hired Russell Case to do some emergency crop dusting this morning. Plant-munching moths had invaded the desert croplands north of L.A., just in time for the Cases, who were dangerously low on cash. The farmer stomped up the driveway with a head of lettuce in one hand. Miguel knew his morning was about to get off to an ugly start. He went to the side door and opened the screen. "Good morning, Lucas. What's going on?" "Your dad in there?" Lucas Foster, a muscular young man, was steaming mad. Alicia slipped past her brother out into the sunlight.
"He went to spray your fields,"
she said.
"He left a long time ago."
"Well, where the hell is he then?" Miguel created a story about how Russell's plane had a mechanical problem the day before, but the other man didn't let him finish. "It's one damn thing after another with that jackass. He's sitting around somewhere with $800 of insecticide while those damn moths are eating my crops." Lucas heard himself shouting and quickly regained control. He was only a couple years older than Miguel and felt sorry for him. Now he was cursing himself for making a business decision based on sympathy for these kids and their crock-pot dad. "Maybe he had to refuel and he's there now," Miguel said hopefully. "Nah, I just called my dad, and he's not in the air," Lucas replied. "He'll probably get there about the same time the wind kicks up. Then we'll have to wait until tomorrow while these moths eat our entire crop." Humiliated, Miguel wanted to crawl into a hole and die. His stepfather, a notorious drunk around town, had put him through some embarrassing moments, but nothing like this. Miguel didn't blame Lucas for being mad. Behind him, Troy was still slapping the side of the TV. "Troy, stop it!" Miguel warned. "If he's not in the air by the time I get back there, I'm going to call Antelope Valley Airport and get somebody else. I can't wait another day." "Yeah, okay, that's fair. I'll go out and look for him right now." He grabbed the keys to his motorcycle and headed out the door. As he walked with Lucas down the end of the driveway, Alicia called after them, asking Lucas for a ride down to the Circle K market. "No!" Miguel exploded, wheeling around to face her. "You get in there and make Troy some breakfast before you go anywhere." Miguel kick-started his bike, an old Kawasaki, and sat in the driveway wondering where to look first. Colonel Costello and his crew at the Pentagon had determined that the giant object had taken up a fixed position and parked itself less than 500 kilometers behind the moon. As the moon moved through space, the object moved with it, hiding behind a white orb like a shield. After repositioning 3 of their satellites, U.S. Space Command was able to get a pretty decent look at the object. They had 3 live cameras beaming infrared pictures of the object back down to Earth, where they were keeping it under constant surveillance. "Colonel," one of the soldiers called loudly, "you better take a look at this." Costello sprinted across the floor and looked over the man's shoulder at the composite infrared picture. The area under the massive object was undergoing some kind of disturbance. "Looks like it's exploding," Costello observed. "More like a mushroom dropping its spores," the man at the monitor said. Large segments of the thing were detaching themselves and twirling away into nearby space. After watching the process for a few more minutes, and seeing the way the pieces arranged themselves in a circle, Costello and the others realized what they were watching. It was time to call General Gray, who'd gone across the Potomac to the White House.